Revelations in court filings show that there's another lawsuit against the Liberal minister from Edmonton showing that he broke the law. This one shows that his shady company and his business partner, well, he's now been directly named in this lawsuit in their search for buyers. Quote, they're going to sell this. I just updated Felix and Randy. And quote, are you confident really? I won't tell Shauna, Felix and Randy yet. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they're not worth the cost or the corruption. So will the Liberal minister from Edmonton stand up and admit to Canadians that he broke the law?
Yeah.
The Honourable Leader of the Government.
Let's hear it, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been dealt with by the Ethics Commissioner, who has cleared that member on 3 occasions. When it comes to his former business partner, we agree with this House. He should have been clear and answered those questions, and now he will face those consequences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Whoa!
The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Canadians can't believe a word from these Liberals when it comes to this scandal. We know that the Cabinet Minister was sitting around the table while his company was applying for federal government contracts, and we know that his business lied before a parliamentary committee. But there's more explosive reporting today about the Liberal Minister from Edmonton and his company fraudulently applying for government contracts. Now, experts are saying that if this is proven to be true, that the Prime Minister should expel the Minister from Cabinet. Conservatives are saying we should call the cops. So will the Prime Minister fire him today or wait till he's dragged out in handcuffs?
There you go, man. Honestly, drag him out.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is making reference to an article that came out today, and I can assure everyone in this House and those watching that the article confirms that the company in question has never received any contracts as an Indigenous business and has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. And our focus is on building up Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs through procurement. We're not going to let any members across the way try to block the progress to achieving economic reconciliation, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with Indigenous partners to reduce the barriers and increase participation in federal procurement.
Order. The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous people are outraged that government contracts meant for Indigenous businesses are being scooped up by shady companies with no Indigenous connection. Today we learned that the Minister of Employment's fraud-ridden company, Global Health Imports, claimed to be Indigenous in order to try and secure millions in lucrative government contracts. Now this all happened while the Minister of Employment was actively running the company. It's time to...
Can we do that?
When will the Minister admit that he is the real Randy and acknowledge that it's wrong to falsely claim Indigenous heritage and take contracts meant for Indigenous peoples and resign?
Can we do that? Is that legal in Canada now? I had Bannock once. Do I qualify for
the Minister of
government money?
Procurement Services.
Is that how that works under Liberal logic?
To ensure that Indigenous people are properly associated with the contracts that are procured. That's why we've established the very motion that's going forward. Members opposite want to criticize and be critical of the program, but it's essential to ensure that Indigenous people have the right, have the ability for economic success and integration so that they too can succeed, and that we understand that those on the Indigenous list are managed appropriately, and the procurement process is also taking transparent measures forward.
The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, today it was revealed that a company co-owned by the Employment Minister bid on federal contracts while claiming to be Indigenous-owned. The company, Global Health Imports, has 2 shareholders. Perhaps 3 if you count the other Randy. But according to the Assembly of First Nations, the Liberals' Indigenous procurement program is being abused by shell companies, with the vast majority of those federal contracts going to non-Indigenous businesses. Will the Prime Minister listen to those leaders, call an investigation, and remove the Minister from Cabinet until the inquiry is finished?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
The article makes it very clear the association that was being referenced here did not get a contract. They were not listed on the Indigenous list, and we've taken the steps appropriately in the procurement to ensure that that doesn't happen, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
He wants to mute the mic.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's failed gun policies are putting Toronto at risk.
Oh, let's go, Janelle.
This year there have been 126 more shootings in Toronto compared to last year, and Peel Regional Police report seizing one illegal firearm every 36 hours. The Liberal MPs who were elected from the Toronto area should be here making noise about these problems, but they're silent. And why are they silent, Mr. Speaker? Because they've decided to back up the Prime Minister's failed policies. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, our position as a Liberal Party, my position as a Toronto MP is simple. Let's keep the citizens of our cities safe. How do we do that? By ensuring that we have less gun violence on our streets. How do we do that? By shoring up our borders to prevent guns from crossing the border. The specific border services that party cut when they were in power prior to 2015. What we also do is we recognize the important impact on domestic violence that gunfare has. When we keep guns,
But it's not from law-abiding gun owners.
Cities in Canada, what we're doing is ensuring that domestic violence doesn't have a pernicious impact on women. That's how you keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
I want my friends and neighbours in Toronto to take note. This Liberal Justice Minister is looking back at things that happened over 10 years ago, while he's been here for 9 years and takes zero responsibility for crime getting worse. Imagine that, getting elected to serve your constituents, sitting here for 9 years and can't take a single bit of responsibility for a problem that he should be trying to fix. Mr. Speaker, it's very, very clear. Crime is worse. The Liberal MPs elected to serve Toronto are failing to do their job. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
This is what a politician should strive to be like. Right to the point, clear and concise. Throw some W's down in the chat for support, man. That was phenomenal.
Mr. Speaker, our government works very effectively with law enforcement professionals across the country, including the regional police, the Peel Regional Police that my colleague referred to, the city of
He took the wind right out of his sails. Look at this.
Police. We've invested, Mr. Speaker, money that the Conservatives cut in the RCMP and border services to prevent illegal guns from entering the country. And Mr. Speaker, we're very surprised the Conservative Party would turn back gun control legislation designed to protect Canadians by making it legal again to have assault-style firearms on the streets of the country.
You can't buy assault-style firearms in Canada legally.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, corruption, or crime. Since 2015, when they formed government, violent crime has skyrocketed by 50%. And sadly, during their reign of error, they have also allowed an evil monster, Paul Bernardo, to be transferred to a medium security institution. On November 26th, this child rapist and serial killer is scheduled to have a parole hearing. Will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister finally get tough on crime and assure Canadians that Paul Bernardo will remain behind bars where he belongs for the rest of his life?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for all members in this House not to use the name of some of the most notorious killers in the country to give them the exact publicity that they crave. This particular individual is locked up in a federal prison behind two very high fences with a lot of razor wire. Mr. Speaker, I saw myself the secure federal correctional facility that this particular individual is in. My colleague also knows the parole board is independent and it would be absolutely inappropriate to prejudge their work, but I have confidence that they'll do their work properly for public safety.
But you have to be able to talk, like name certain things to be able to talk about certain issues.
Member for Halifax.
That logic doesn't make sense.
Speaker, this summer, millions of Canadians tuned into CBC to cheer on Team Canada at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris. Canadian athletes pushed limits, set new records, and showed us the unifying power of sport. Many of these trained at Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic in Halifax West. Canada's athletes give it their all to represent our country, so we're going to keep supporting them with more pay for more athletes as they train to represent Canada. Can the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity tell us how we're going to support these athletes so they can keep representing Canada with pride and excellence?
The Honourable Minister for Sport and Physical Activity.
Mr. Speaker, the Paris 2024 Games were extraordinary. Canadians cheered on our Olympic and Paralympic teams as records were broken,
Didn't she quit?
medals were won, and history was made. The journey from playground to podium is long and it's hard, and our athletes train for years. Our Liberal government is proud to support over 1,900 athletes through the Athlete Assistance Program, and we're also proud to be increasing this program to provide more money for more athletes. An additional $7 million a year means a 23% in the living allowance and an additional 30% allowance for Paralympic athletes. By investing in Canadian athletes, we're inspiring the next generation and building a stronger, united Canada.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, homelessness is growing amongst seniors for the first time ever. Canadian seniors who live on fixed incomes are being hit hardest by skyrocketing rents driven by unregulated corporate greed. The Liberals have sat by while private investors jack up their rents and squeeze our parents, grandparents, and veterans out of their homes. When will the Liberals stop caving to corporate landlords and private long-term care investors to protect seniors?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I share her concern about the plight of some of Canada's most vulnerable, those without a roof over their head. In order to address those challenges, we need to ensure that we build out the affordable housing stock so people can find a place that is safe, that they can afford. That's why we're moving forward with billions of dollars of investments to help build affordable housing in this country at a pace that is not seen in many decades. It's why we put money on the table to support nonprofits to buy up existing affordable housing that exists in the market to ensure that it remains affordable forever, and it's why we have restored, after decades of cuts, more investments in cooperative and affordable housing. We'll continue to do what it takes to ensure every Canadian.
Member for Spadina.
That was a bit of a hiccup.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will soon pause to remember the brave men and women of Canada's armed forces who served our country and made the ultimate sacrifice. Whether in Flanders, on Juno Beach, the hills of Korea, or the sands of Afghanistan, they fought for Canada, for our democracy, and the freedoms that we all enjoy today. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to wear this country's uniform. I believe in our democratic institutions. I believe all members of this House are duty-bound to accept and hold high the torch passed from those fallen in the defense of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully ask the government if they all can say the same.
Dude, bring in the controversy.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we all admire the sacrifice and service that veterans have given to us. I think that question was quite out of line. However, as it is Veterans Week, I think it does deserve to remember and commend all the veterans who sacrificed their lives, given back for our freedoms, and protected the democratic processes that we have today. We will always remember them, not only on Veterans Week, but every day of this year. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. There's what the government does, and then there says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports are very hard to read. I would invite the Honourable Member for Jonquière to start again from the top, please. There's what the government says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports make tough reading. And despite what the minister claims, the Liberals' record is really not good. This government takes the survival of threatened species lightly. And when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, well, Canada is the worst in the G7 when it comes to meeting its targets. The Liberals have quit. Are they really ready to leave biodiversity and the fight against climate change to the Conservatives? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague knows how much respect I have for him, but you know, a good part of his party is allied with the Conservative Party to bring down the government to prevent a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector. They want to prevent us from putting in place a law to protect nature. And when we came to power in 2015, Mr. Speaker, Canada didn't protect even 1% of our oceans and our coasts. We're up to 16% today. We'll be at 30% in 2030, as we promised in Montreal at COP15.
For the second time today, I'm going to ask the honourable member from Miramichi Grand Lake to please not take the floor unless
The honourable member for Jonquière. Canada has just 6 years to meet its greenhouse gas emissions target of 45% under 2005 levels. 6 years. According to the Environment Commissioner, Canada has only reduced emissions by 7.1% as of 2022. That's a terrible record. By the time the federal government wakes up, all the forests will have burned and all the glaciers will have melted. 7.1%, that's not even a sixth of the goal. And, I mean, come on, Mr. Speaker, do they really want to leave the future of the planet in the hands of the Conservatives and their friends in the oil and gas sector? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague that when we came to power in 2015, the projections were that Canada was going to miss its 2030 target by at least 30%. We have flattened the curve, and as of 2022, we were at 7.1% under 2005 levels. That's the difference between the two. It's like the equivalent of adding 79 million cars to Canada's roads with pollution. We didn't do that because of our plan, and I look forward to working with my colleagues so that Canada can do more to fight climate change.
The honourable member for Banff-Airdrie.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing, and veterans who fought for our country are feeling the pinch more than anyone. Sadly, veterans are 3 times more likely to become homeless. And a recent study indicates that there's 4 times more homeless veterans than the government claims. As many as 10,000 homeless veterans, in fact. Terrible. That's 10,000 too many. Yeah. So how can the government who caused the problem and who won't even admit the extent of the problem be trusted to fix the problem?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of sending our citizens to war includes the cost of taking care of them when they come home. That's why we have moved forward with programs that are designed to actually ensure that communities have the capacity to provide housing to those who have put their lives at risk in order to protect our country overseas and at home. Mr. Speaker, I recently was able to work with the Canadian Alliance to end homelessness, to scale up a program that has ended functional homelessness for veterans in 3 communities across this country so they can expand it to 26 additional cities. We've also worked very closely with community organizations across this country, and what's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, when it came time to put your position on the record, the Conservatives voted against these programs.
He should be immigration minister again.
The number of homeless veterans just keeps going up.
He lost 1 million people. We're going to have to lose a lot more people when all the Americans flee to Canada.
The Association Food Bank in Calgary reports that in the last 6 months alone, their numbers have tripled in what they're spending to keep veterans housed, clothed, and fed. Veterans served our country, and they deserve better than the homelessness and hunger that they're getting from this NDP Liberal government. Veterans, like all Canadians, can't afford the cost. So when will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so veterans can finally get the respect they deserve?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans.
We're not going to take any lessons from the Conservatives. They shut down 9 Veterans Affairs offices. We opened 9, plus another one in my hometown of Surrey Centre. They laid off 1,000 Veterans Affairs officers who are there to help veterans get the services they need. We reinstated those services. We've created services to help those veterans get the needs that they need, and we will continue to do so going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, les Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, the cost of rent and housing has gone up. It's doubled, and homelessness is up. The Bloc has supported the Liberals for 2 non-confidence votes. The Conservatives are calling for cutting the GST on new homes, and we've heard from many who feel that the Conservative leader's plan is a step in the right direction. Will the Liberal Bloc cut the GST on housing, or is it going to continue to fund its programs that build 0 new homes? The Honourable Minister
There's going to be another
Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Another vote soon.
Honestly,
once Parliament is unfrozen.
As the member knows,
Pierre strategically waiting.
We are making investments to build affordable housing. Just as an example, in the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have an agreement underway with Quebec to build 8,000 social housing units. The Conservatives are against that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they talk about when we cut GST for apartment rent, the Conservatives for building apartments, the Conservatives were against that. The Conservatives' leaders' strategy is just to cut, and that's unacceptable.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, cities like Toronto are on the front lines when it comes to responding to the housing crisis. That's why last year we announced a $500 million federal investment in Toronto through the Housing Accelerator Fund to unlock over 53,000 new homes over the next decade. Last week, the Conservative leader announced a plan that will impact home building in Toronto by making dangerous cuts to housing investments. People in my constituency of Davenport can't afford these kinds of enormous Conservative housing cuts. To the Minister of Housing, how can we stop these Conservative cuts and solve the housing crisis for Canadians?
Really good question.
Thank you very much.
Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I want to offer a couple of points. First, I want to thank my colleague for her advocacy, for her community to receive funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund.
When they thank each other and stuff for getting up and speaking, man, it's just so funny.
Mr. Speaker, is the Conservative strategy, which is now to forbid their MPs from advocating for their communities. On this side of the House, we have community advocates who will stand up so their communities get the funding they need. Second, we know that actually building homes takes investments. That's why we're putting money into the system to help build affordable housing, to help reduce barriers to construction. But third, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative strategy is to cut billions of dollars from housing. That simply isn't going to work.
I ask the Honourable Member from Kingston and the Islands to please, if he wishes to have a conversation, to have it offline.
Whoa.
Okay.
Order, please.
Whoa.
The Honourable Member from Durham.